So, my name is Erin, and I write fantasy and poetry.
And I'm Kara House, and I write fantasy and science fiction.
And today, in this video, we're going to be talking about how to have a healthy writing group. And before we talk about our opinions on that, we just kind of want to preface, there are lots of different reasons that you might want to have a writing group. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about is writing groups that are more geared toward trying to, really give good, useful critique on each other's work to, really try to get into the refining. It's totally good to have writing groups that are a little bit more about more pure encouragement or just trying to take the step of sharing your work. But what we're talking about is going to, be a little bit more on that other side of just, how to give critique well, how to take it well, how to implement it and things like that. All right, cool. Would you like to introduce our first point?
Yes, I will. Also checking my notes. Okay. Okay, so we've kind of split this up into categories. Mm-hmm. So our first category is general points about having a writing group. And then we're going to talk about giving feedback and receiving feedback. So the first general thing is that if you want a writing group, focus on critique and kind of honing your skills, it's probably best to keep it small. Our writing group is 4 people at the moment, and I can't imagine, I feel like more than 6 would be hard. I mean, I don't think there's a hard rule for this, but I think it's good to keep it small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have anything to
add to that part? Yeah, I mean, and I guess just the reason for that is because you're not, it does make it easier to make sure that people get to frequently share their work and that you don't have somebody kind of going a lot of times in a row, I guess, before you get to another member. It also just, helps it to where everybody can kind of express the ideas or comments that they have, in whatever time frame you designate. I don't know.
Yeah. It's at least for our writing group, I feel like it's still casual, but because it's small, we're able to we don't have hard rules of everyone gets X amount of minutes to talk or whatever, but because it's small, that kind of just happens naturally, I feel like. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you can have hard rules and that would be fine, but it's just easy to just have a small writing group.
Right. All right. Point 2 under our kind of general things is just making sure that you kind of already have it in your mind that everybody's going to be mutually respectful. And that's both on the, giving critique side and the kind of receiving it. Everybody's coming with different opinions, different ideas, different kind of, just training and background. And it's good to keep in mind that, you kind of have to consider those things and those differences as you're giving and receiving feedback to each other. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, I feel like it can be, obviously, I feel like writers, a lot of people tend to have really strong opinions. Mm-hmm. Writers like to talk typically and have opinions on things. That's what we have to share with the world is our thoughts and opinions. And I think just, going in with an attitude of everyone here is a writer just like me. Mm-hmm. I want to show respect the way I want to feel respected. And also being because it's critique and feedback, it's kind of hard to avoid stepping on people's toes, at least a little bit. And you just going in with that attitude of okay, giving grace, expecting grace, being respectful, and not just being well, I thought this sucked. Mm-hmm. And that should never be, no one should ever say this just sucked in a writing group. That's just that's not kind, and it's not helpful critique, which I guess we'll get into more in the giving feedback section.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and our third point under general how to think about a writing group was you need to keep in mind who's in your writing group. Mm-hmm. I think it's cool if you can do okay, we all write YA fantasy or we all write military science fiction or something like that. But our writing group has different people who write different things. Yeah, very different things. Yes. And a lot of writing groups are like that because for one, it's I feel like it's pretty rare to meet people in real life that like to write. And it's even rarer to meet people, to meet enough people to fill a writing group that write only exactly what you write.
Yes.
Feels like an unreasonable expectation. So if it works out, that's great. So just being aware of that, not everyone's in the same genre, not everyone's at the same level, not everyone has the same goals. So I guess this is where it helps to be friends. Like knowing what people are looking for and what they're trying to get out of the group will help make it better.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of like when you're kind of trying to put a writing group together, is also considering the pros and cons of that, of like having writers who are really similar or having ones who are different. Because like in our writing group, we've got 3 people who write speculative fiction and 1 person who writes fiction that is mostly realistic. She gets a little speculative. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like an undercurrent. But so like that can be really helpful to have people who all write the same thing, because if you're trying to do a certain genre, feature, or convention, you know, you're going to want people who know what that typically looks like to be able to give you feedback. But it's also really helpful to have a person who doesn't write that, because she can kind of give us feedback on, you know, the more kind of stripped back, like basic things, like the character. Like I feel like she's got a different perspective on that than we might sometimes, because it's like, well, if you're thinking about things more in terms of like reality rather than like what it is in fiction and in a genre, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like, well, this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like contemporary and like literary fiction, character's important in everything, but I feel like it's especially important in those genres, because like that's, you don't have like, and then the aliens arrive to like make things, to like spice things up. You mostly have the characters. I mean, I guess you could have a murder mystery plot or whatever, but like characters are a big part of it. So yeah, I feel like she has a lot of good perspective on that, because that's like such a big focus of her genre.
Right. All right. Our second kind of category is going to be talking more about how to give feedback well. So, or what we would think is a good way to give it.
Yeah, what we think is giving good feedback.
Right. And so the first thing is to give critique and give praise. So, you know, you don't want to just be necessarily, you know, leaning too hard on one of those sides. It's good to have both of them and kind of have a balance. Or, you know, whatever ratio is appropriate for that piece that week or however often you're meeting up. But, you know, to not just like leave one of those out entirely.
Yeah, I feel like there's this quote or this thing people cite all the time that's like, it takes 5 positive comments to like outweigh 1 negative comment. I've like heard that from a lot of different people. I don't know where it's from, but it feels true. Yes. And I think like the critique I've got, like, yeah, both are just so important, because like I know for my book, like there's some of the critiques I got were so helpful, because I was like, I didn't even see this as a problem, or like I didn't realize, or like I knew something was off here, but people saying this character interaction didn't feel believable helped me to go, oh, that's what's off. It's not these other things.
Yeah.
So like critique is super important, and if you don't get, I think if at some point in your writing journey you will need to get to a place where like you have to get feedback, otherwise you're not going to keep growing. But also the praise is so important, and like shows you what you're doing right, because also there were some things that some scenes in my book that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to keep this in. Like, this is weird, it's cringy, like I don't feel like it's working. And then when I had like people who read it go, I loved that was hilarious, I'm like, oh, okay, so that is working. Because I feel like as writers, and I guess just creative people, we get really in our own heads and we're like, oh, this is bad. And so I'm just hearing someone be like, I like this. And you're like, wow, I didn't know anyone would like this. That's great. Okay, maybe I like it too.
And then also sometimes it does take knowing who you're giving the feedback to, also kind of like striking that balance too, of like kind of like if you're going to give critique, kind of know how, you know, other people would like receive it and things like that. Like how to package it, I guess.
Yes, because some people are going to be like, just like in general, like some people I know like get annoyed if they get like a bunch of like they're like, get to the point. Just tell me some people are like, I don't want, and then other people, such as myself, are like, but tell me, like, please tell me something nice. I thrive off of it.
I'm right there with you.
I'm like, that will keep me going for a long time.
Tell me there's a purpose.
So okay, I think this next point kind of ties into what we're talking about, like being aware about your members. Like, you want to give helpful feedback and critique related to what the writer needs. So like, like I said, everyone has different goals. Everyone's at different steps. Some people may bring a piece to a writing group that they've like looked at 100 times before already and be like, and like be worrying about like the sentence level of things. Some people might be like, oh, I like, you know, I'm really trying to focus on my characters. I'm not like, and if maybe you give a comment about like the world building that might not be relevant. And like and knowing like the types of stories they're trying to write too. Cause like even in fantasy or speculative fiction, the world isn't always super important in the story. And I feel like sometimes I'm like, okay, but what about this thing? Are we going to explain this thing in the world? And it's like, well, that's not always relevant. It just depends on what the writer needs. Yeah. I feel like something that can help, some people in our group will send a list of like questions or things they're looking for. And I think that can be really helpful for making the feedback like relevant.
Yeah. And in that vein of knowing kind of what the person wants to have feedback on, what's most pertinent at that time, is also knowing kind of like at what extent do you provide that feedback in that moment. Because usually with the writing group, if you're meeting frequently enough, you may have an opportunity to go back over that piece again. And if you've got a lot of critique about something, it may not always be great to just let those floodgates open on that factor for that section all that one meeting. Like sometimes you can kind of revisit things, or you can kind of say just kind of keep in mind what are the most important things, because you don't necessarily want somebody to just kind of be sitting there like listening to like a kind of a speech, I guess, a little bit of like
you don't really want to like monologue. I felt myself, there's been times in writing group where I felt myself like, okay, I've talked about this a lot. I gotta stop, like, because like you said, at some point it's like, okay, you've said the point. Like,
yes. Yeah. And that's another, I guess we aren't necessarily going to talk about like tools, but one thing we use is we usually share with like Google Docs. And so you can leave comments. And so it's like that sometimes is helpful too, is like maybe those other things that are maybe smaller items. It's like just kind of like you can send that at another time. It doesn't necessarily have to be in that meeting. Like you still want to make sure that people get feedback that's going to make their work the best it can be. But sometimes spreading out how long they have to kind of process certain chunks of it, that can be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because definitely there's a lot of stuff you can comment on in a Google Doc that if you were to read all of those out loud, it would be like, that's too much. And it's just, I feel like it's easier to look at comments than to like hear verbally, and this and this thing and this thing could have been better, and this thing. Yeah.
A third thing to kind of keep in mind when you're giving feedback is also keeping in mind that everybody has different preferences. So like this is one thing that may show up a lot more if you do have a group of writers who write different things. I remember a class we took in college, a lot of people, some people in that class, like it was like, if it's clearly like a genre convention, it was just kind of like that kind of automatically made it negative in their mind. We wouldn't necessarily say that, obviously.
If you're a fan of that convention, it's positive. Yeah.
Right. So it's also just keeping in mind, like some things are not actually objectively good or bad within like the craft or necessarily like the overall quality of that piece. Sometimes it is just like, you don't necessarily want to see this happen in a story, or you wouldn't have done it that way. So it's just kind of like taking a second to kind of be like, what category does this critique fit under? Is it an opinion, or is it really something that's constructive to express?
Yeah, I think like for example, like some people love training scenes and like live for the training scenes, or like the super detailed stuff about like magic systems or whatever. And some people are like, I don't care about this person training and getting better. Like I just want to see the next plot point. But some people, that's like their favorite part. There's this section in Rhythm of War where these characters are learning about this thing, and it goes like so deep into it, and they spend chapters and chapters learning about this new thing and like figuring it out. And when I read it, I was talking to one of my friends who also read it, and I was like, yeah, that part dragged for me. I thought it was really slow, and I would have cut a lot of that out. And he was like, that was like my favorite part of the book. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there you go. Like, it's not, and like some things like, there's just different, it's hard to know what's like, because to me, I would have thought, oh, maybe that's bloated. But yeah, it's hard to know what's opinion and what's like a valid critique. But the more you can think about it, I guess the better. Of like,
yeah, it's really just taking that step of really just actually considering it instead of just kind of like letting it all out.
Yes, like, okay, let me think. Is this just me, or is there actually something here? And if you're not sure, like, you could mention it, I guess, but just preface like, hey, but I also this could just be me. And that's kind of connected to this next point about receiving feedback. So like how we were talking about, like, okay, you don't know as someone giving feedback if this is a genre convention or just like, or actually a problem, or if it's just a personal issue you have with it. And sometimes people will say things that they think are, just because nobody's perfect, you can't your writing is subjective. There's no way to like avoid saying opinions because a lot of it is opinions, which is why it's really important for the person who is receiving feedback to keep a clear vision in mind for what they want for the story. Like if you're like, I am writing a sappy romance and I want it to be like gushing with romance and all the characters are feeling all the emotions at the time because that's what I love and that's my vision for the story. And then someone in your writing group is like, I feel like they shouldn't have had this strong of a reaction to a thing, or like, I feel like this was too much or overdone. You, as the person getting feedback, have to be able to be like, okay, I hear you, but I know that the story I'm trying to tell is the super over-the-top, mushy romance.
Yes.
Yeah, so like keeping the vision for your story in mind. Yeah, I feel like it's important.
Yeah. And sometimes that kind of goes into the questions that you leave unanswered or the mystery that you create in what you're writing. Because if you know that you're foreshadowing something and the person giving the critique is frustrated because they're confused, that might be appropriate that they're maybe not confused at that point, but that they have questions. So, you know, if it's too confusing, you know, you can kind of take that and store it away and apply it later. But, yeah, so I think it's also just, you know what's coming a lot of the time when you're writing, unless you're like a 100% pure discovery writer and you haven't finished it at that point. But most of the time I feel like you've got a sense. So it's like just kind of taking those things into account. And then one thing that I don't remember exactly the source. I might have heard this from Jonathan Rogers, or there's a really, I've heard it's a good book. I haven't actually read it, I think it's called Bandersnatch, and it's about giving good critique. But kind of the idea is also just your goal shouldn't be to change the person's idea or like change the product that it is. You're really just trying to express, this is my experience of reading it. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes you might be looking for more of the technical, you know, am I doing this convention well? But a lot of the time you're really just sharing like, this is what I got when I read it. This is kind of the journey. Or like the feeling or what I'm thinking, like reading this. And it's just kind of like, you know, if it's your work being critiqued, you're just trying to say, okay, does that align with what my goal is for this section or this piece?
That sounds like a good book.
Yeah. And you read it. Yeah. It's on my Goodreads.
Yeah, there you go. There's also like, the Writing Excuses podcast, like the old season of it, or one of the older seasons with Brandon Sanderson, because he's not in it anymore, which makes sense, but has a really good episode on writing groups that we can link in the description. But it's really good because like it was just interesting to hear from people who have had success as writers talk about their experience with the writers group. And Brandon Sanderson was like 75% of what I hear in a critique group, or like what people hear in critique groups, you might be able to just throw away, which is like just keeping like your vision in mind of like, okay. And he even said, he was like, yeah, you know, you don't want to push, like, that's why I feel like it's important to keep your vision for the story in mind. Like, and he said, yeah, like he's felt he pushed too hard in writing groups to like, without like recognize, like to like change people's ideas. And sometimes that just happens and you've got to be able to, within yourself, protect your story. While still, you know, being open to critique, but being like, I know what I want it to be at the end.
Right. Yeah. One thing my dad likes to say when he hears people critique is like, well, you go write that then.
That sounds like that makes sense. Yeah.
It's like that thing that you don't like, well, you just go do it and fix it yourself.
Right, yeah. Make another story that has the things that you wish this one did.
Yeah. Okay, and our last point, overall and for receiving feedback, is to just be humble. Remember, you know, we're all working on things. They're all new. Everything should, you know, you just kind of have to have an open mind and remember that it's like, if there's critique, it's not necessarily a personal attack. And with all these things we've kind of mentioned, you know, just kind of keeping in mind, it may be valid critique and advice and it may not be, and you get to make that choice, but also, you know, just consider it. You know, you don't want to like throw everything out kind of immediately, like with the 75% thing. Maybe don't use
that as a hurdle. That's you know, that's a podcast. I don't necessarily remember exactly what he said.
No. But also, it's a good example.
We're not Brandon Sanderson. If you're just starting out, and even if you're, you know, you'll just you have to weigh each piece of feedback on its own.
It's just to be able to have both of those thoughts of like, this may be something that needs to be fixed, and to really, you know, genuinely consider it, but also be able to honestly say, this may not serve the story I'm trying to write, or say, you know what, that was correct. I can move forward knowing that was a weakness or something and fix it or just make it better. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like sometimes I've gotten pieces of critique where I was like, no, I don't think that's right. And then I think about them and I'm like, no, yeah, I think it was right. I think they did have a point. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like this dichotomy of like knowing what story you're trying to tell, but also being humble to know that might not have been the story that you've written, and like using the feedback that you hear from people to be like, okay, how can I get this? How can I use what they're saying to get as close to the vision as I can? And it's really kind of, I feel like it's one of those things you also just get better with the more you do. Like, I feel like the first time I got my work critiqued, I was like I was freaking out. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, like I had a little pen and paper and I was like just like filling in squares on the paper because I was like, I am so nervous about this. And then the first time also, I feel like I gave critique. I feel like it wasn't as helpful as the kind of critiques I give now. So I think it's like writing a skill that you build.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it's like, don't let it send you into, I'm going to quit and never write again territory. But also remember, very few people come out of the gate perfect at it. So
yeah,
if anybody.
Right.
Surely someone somewhere.
Surely someone, but not either of us, and probably not you. I mean, maybe, but probably not. Yeah. We hope that this was helpful. If you have anything to add about writing groups, feel free to leave it in the comments. I think we've got a pretty good writing group, but we're by no means experts.
Yes.
So yeah, go out there and have good writing groups if you so choose. All right. Bye.